That's basically it. There's some optimizations we can do here, and I want to talk about those. So remember I said all these queries return like Mongo or Mongoose objects. We don't really need Mongoose objects here because the only time you ever need a Mongoose object is when you're doing an operation on that object itself, like .remove, .populate, something you're doing on the object. We're not doing anything to these objects, and it takes Mongoose time to build that object. So we can save Mongoose the time and not build that object and just return us the pure JSON. So the way you would do that is you would do .lean on the query. So lean means like just give me the JSON, give me the object, that's it. I don't want all these fancy properties, just give me the JSON. And that's very helpful because we're sending it back as JSON, so we just want to do that. So .lean is good for that. If you didn't want to do .lean or you couldn't, like for example, down here on create, you can't do .lean because it's not a query. The way you'd have to do that is you would use the .toJSON method on the document itself, which will convert it to a regular object. You can also do .toObject, and it will also do it. But those are optimizations you can do just to get the regular JavaScript object representation of your data versus like a Mongoose model. And it does speed up database queries, especially if you're like, looking at a lot of stuff. So that's querying it. And then from there, all you have to do is just connect to the database and then start your server. And then you kind of got to figure out like what order do you want to do that? Do you start your server first, then connect your database? Do you connect your database, then start your server? There's no wrong or right answer there. It really kind of depends on what it is that you want to do. So in this example, you might see me, like right now I'm already connecting, so maybe now I'll start my server after I connect. So maybe the database is already connected, so now I'll start the server on like port 5000 after the database is connected. Boom, now I start the server. And Express, that's how you start a server. It's that simple. The sweet thing about Mongoose is that while the database is building up these models and these collections for you, if you start running operations on them, they'll buffer them. Kind of like an analytics tool does. If you ever use any analytics tool on the front end, like Google Analytics or literally any analytics like library ever, before it loads up, if you start issuing analytics commands and tracking commands to it, it'll capture all these events in like an array. And then when it finally loads up, it'll replay them in the order that it happened. So it'll buffer them. Mongoose does the same thing. So like if you start ushering commands on the database, on the node model, or the whatever model you have, before it's done initializing, it'll just buffer those commands and replay them when it does connect. The problem with that is you might have unexpected side effects. For instance, if you start ushering commands like find and create before the indexes were built, then you might have some code that got some data that snuck in there, that snuck past the indexes. So maybe you want to wait for those indexes to be built. But indexes actually take a long time to be built sometimes. So there's like a lot of trade-offs that you have to think about: when to index, when to set up, what to wait for, and it's all very specific to your application. Most applications, you don't really have to think about that. But when you get into like really big production applications, you really got to think about like, when do I index? Do I wait for the indexes? How do I go about doing this? And yeah, it's all very case by case.